Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. J-Bo here. I wanted to take a brief moment to address new gun legislation in Maine that did pass. Some of it didn't pass, thankfully. But we have, at least 4 out of the 6 that they wanted to pass. Something happened with them. And for the state of Maine, just to fill you in, if you're not from Maine, we have constitutional carry. Currently have no restrictions on firearms at all, magazine capacities, nothing at all. So the Democrats, obviously, their new national agenda is firearms, firearms, it's the guns, it's the guns. So that filtered over into Maine, and also to fill you in, that many Democrats in Maine own firearms, okay? And that seems to be a problem for the Democrats. It's not going to deter them. You know, voters don't want this stuff. They're going to do it anyway. So hopefully that comes back to bite them in November, but I'll get to that in a minute. So, Maine is a very rural state, pretty good sized state compared to states like New Hampshire, Massachusetts, etc. But we have 1.4 million people through the entire state. So there's not many people here. It's very sparse. I can go just 3 miles up the road and shoot guns all I want to. You know, it's one of those kind of things, and I'm in the second most populated area, just to give you an idea. So anyway, what did they have? Well, one thing they did pass, and my senator, who is state senator, Peggy Rotundo, sponsored a bill for a 72-hour waiting period to purchase a firearm, under the premise that somebody from my city here bought a firearm at Walmart and they killed themselves with it. Unfortunate. It's a mental health issue. It's not a firearm issue, but anyway, so what happened is she decided to come up with this bill, even though, as and she's one of those people that will personally answer her emails when you send emails. She does type responses back, and it is her. She identifies as her. Phone calls I get from an aide or somebody that volunteers for her. But anyway, pretty much every message that I have sent them, I get some kind of return correspondence, which is good because a lot of people don't do that. But anyway, basically I had said that, you know, she gave me an answer back today, but the 72-hour waiting period passed. It went under a lot of back and forth to the House, to the Senate, to the House, to the Senate, amend this, amend that. It finally did get passed, and it has limited exemptions. Basically, you have to be in law enforcement and things like that. You don't need to, the 72-hour waiting period, this is what they did to sell it to Democrat voters. And apparently they got enough people on board with this, because this same bill last year didn't pass because the Democrat voters didn't want a 72-hour waiting period. So what they did was they assessed what the problem was with their voters, which was that they don't want to have to do a background check and have a 72-hour wait when Uncle Skip dies and leaves his World War II Garand, and you have to go through loopholes and paperwork, and you got to go do a background check through an FFL to get this firearm from somebody that has let you shoot it their whole life. You already know about it, and it should be just an heirloom. So that's what the Democrat gun owners were concerned about. They weren't concerned about people killing themselves. The ones that don't own firearms were sold that. I'll get to that in a minute. But so they stuck that in there this time because it didn't pass last year with voters. So this time, family members, relatives, you can transfer ownership of firearms, and without an FFL. A perfect example, I was gifted a shotgun at Christmas time. It's actually this one, which I took it out because we're going to go shooting tomorrow. It's a 1975 Mossberg 395T, bolt action, fully choked. It's a good shooter. So they wanted to hassle people, and she did send an email back, because I had sent her an email and I had said that the internet, which is true, the forums I've seen on various gun websites, Democrat gun owners are not happy that this passed. So I don't know who was calling her supporting that. It must have been these activists, young people. They don't own firearms. They just want guns banned because somebody on TV said so. I don't know. But I basically told her it doesn't prevent suicides, which it doesn't. It doesn't. Okay, if you make a 72-hour waiting period, somebody that's depressed wants to kill themselves, you know, they're not going to have no other alternatives. There's the most common one is hanging, okay? That's the most common one used. Drug overdoses is another, and slitting their wrist with a razor blade. Firearms is very low on the list of things used to kill yourself with. And again, if you are feeling really terrible thoughts, do not do anything to yourself and seek help. There are plenty of helplines available. Just Google it, get some help, okay? So this doesn't have anything to do with that aspect of it. I'm just saying that certain things that are used to do that are more prevalent than what they're banning. So they always come down to it's the guns. Which leads me to the message she sent me, which I'll bring this up here. All right, so she sent her message, and the message says that my motivation for putting this bill in had nothing to do with Michael Bloomberg or anyone else outside Maine. I want to protect lives and the people I serve. All right, so it's talking about this man who bought a gun at Walmart one afternoon and came home and killed himself with it. Again, that's very tragic, okay? But that doesn't represent the norm or the greater good, and it does not represent, it doesn't weigh against thousands of Maine owners who now have to wait 72 hours because this person did that. So she says his mother later found his body. None of the bills that were passed will impact law-abiding gun owners. Your constitutional rights are protected. This is a very common Democrat reply. So what Peggy Rotundo is saying here is that, okay, this is the mentality they have. It's the guns, it's not mental health. So if they passed a whole bunch of legislation and made it like you can only own a single shot 20 gauge shotgun, and you have to get a license to buy it, and there's a tax stamp on it, and you can't have this or that attached to it. You can't have an optic. You can't have a scope. You can't even have a front sight, okay? They've regulated the guns that are left, that 20 gauge, single shot, single barrel shotgun, and it can only have a certain amount of lead shot in the shells. I'm just saying hypothetically, this is their mentality, okay? They do all that. They make you get a license, a tax stamp, all this other stuff, and then they say to you, oh, what are you crying about? You still have your constitutional Second Amendment right to own firearms. You can own two. So firearms, see? Two 20 gauge single shot shotguns. They always try to put this on there, we're not taking your gun rights. Well, I don't see, since rope and razor blades are the leading causes of death for suicides and drug overdoses, according to the Maine CDC stats, quite a few thousand people end up in the emergency department at the hospital with suicide intent or attempts. And it's primarily razor blades, hanging, and drug overdoses, prescription drugs. Sometimes they just take a whole bottle of something that's not even prescribed that would be effective. So it's a cry for help. It's mental health, okay? And that's, I'm sympathetic to that. They should be taking all of this energy that they're wasting on limiting responsible gun owners and actually aggressively investing in mental health. Something nationally is a huge epidemic right now, especially among young people. So the causes of that is a whole nother thing. It's really not pertinent to this issue. But the point being, they're not going to put a 72-hour waiting period on razor blades. They're not going to put a 72-hour waiting period on you going to pick up your prescription drugs, painkillers, or whatever. And they're not going to put a 72-hour waiting period on anything else. So it's just one of those things where it's easier to hang yourself or overdose on drugs than it is to go buy a firearm and do it that way. Because one, there's money involved, and there's this and that, and a background check. And so we're supposed to assume that all people that are going to commit suicide would pass a background check. Maybe they get a criminal record. Maybe they've had drug problems. And on the form you fill out to pick up your firearm, you have to put if you're a drug addict on there. Obviously, if somebody's going to take their own life, they're not going to be honest. So basically, this is a problem all the way around. And this really doesn't solve it, in my opinion. This is just more gun legislation. It's always the guns, right? It's always the guns. It's nothing else. And that's what these people don't seem to understand about that. So that's the 72-hour waiting period. The other thing that is passed the House and the Senate and is going to the governor is I'll bring this up. I got my magic blackboard here. This is important stuff. So the other thing that passed was the rapid fire modifications. Effectively, it's a machine gun ban, okay? Now, machine guns have already been banned. You have to get a tax stamp. In Maine, you can own a machine gun. If you get the tax stamp, you go through the process with the ATF. You get that kind of background check done. It takes 12 months or longer. But if you're fortunate enough to be able to afford a vintage machine gun, which is thousands of dollars, you can shoot it in Maine if you have a tax stamp and permit from the government to do that. So what this law had to do was binary triggers. People that shoot in competitions and they do trigger jobs, they modify their trigger to be able to shoot easier. That's going to be illegal now, according to this bill, which is why it should have been opposed. They didn't specify. Okay, that's the problem. They went with the Maine constitutional statute on machine guns, and they didn't go with the federal one. The federal one specifically mentions rifles, okay, rifles. The Maine one just says firearms. What's a firearm? Everything from a revolver to a shotgun. So now, if you modify the trigger on a shotgun to make it shoot easier, it's now a machine gun. That's what they passed. I don't think anybody's ever going to enforce that, but technically that's what the bill says. Any firearm. So that one passed. So binary triggers, where you pull the trigger, fires, you release the trigger, and it fires. Or bump stocks. So it was real painful to me listening to Democrats on the floor bringing up Donald Trump as an example because Trump wanted to ban bump stocks after the Las Vegas shooting. So I really wished Trump hadn't done that. It's unfortunate, and I believe that is still tied up with the Supreme Court right now, even though they had made a ruling on something else having to do with that. I think it's going back again with something else. So when they passed this, they said that they worded it different. I think what they did was they worded it different from the federal one intentionally, because if the Supreme Court of the United States rules that bump stocks are constitutional, that they're going to try to say, well, this legislation is separate and there's different reasons why it was banned. I don't know what their thinking is, but they're up to something with that. They mentioned it on the floor. So they had mentioned that if the Supreme Court rules that bump stocks are constitutional, and binary triggers specifically, because I guess that's the argument that's coming up. And you have a lot of people that shoot competitions with pistols, 1911s, revolvers. They do trigger jobs. They make hair triggers where just it's really easy to like bang, 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 bang like a machine gun. And so they didn't really clearly specify what's going to be legal or illegal. So I suspect that that's going to end up in a courtroom somewhere at some point. So thankfully, some things did not pass. The course of action one. Now this was good because the manufacturers in the state of Maine, okay, this was LD 1696. LD 1696. Okay, this was a course of action against firearm manufacturers and retailers whose firearms are used in a criminal activity. So they wanted to punish the local shops that sell a firearm and it ends up being used in a crime or a mass shooting. They wanted to be able to sue the manufacturers. And fortunately, the manufacturers, there are gun manufacturers in Maine like Smith & Wesson and Wyndham Weaponry and other places. They sent a letter to the Senate saying, look, if you pass this, we're packing up and we're leaving your state. No questions asked. It's a done deal because we cannot survive as a business in an environment that is hostile like that. So that would take about 150 jobs from Holton, Maine. It would take tax revenue. It would take a lot of revenue from the state of Maine, who again only has 1.4 million people. We really can't afford to be sending businesses out of state. The lawmakers here were very familiar with what happened in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York with firearm manufacturers packing up and leaving. There's even a lot of misinformation online among gun owners who don't even know that Remington was manufacturing firearms in New York. They were manufacturing primarily shotguns, and people just assumed that Remington wasn't making firearms anymore because there was a couple of articles out stating that, and they were making just ammunition. Well, no, the ammunition they make, I believe, it's either in Oklahoma or Arkansas or Kansas or someplace out in the Midwest. There's a huge Remington ammo manufacturing facility that reopened after the pandemic. They hired a whole bunch of people. I read about it. I just don't remember where it is. And in upstate New York, Remington was making shotguns. And I don't know what else they were making. I'm not, an expert on all of this. I just know that the Remington shotguns, typically the 870, was being made in northern New York. And they announced they were moving to Georgia. Smith & Wesson and Smith & Wesson and a couple other companies, Connecticut, Massachusetts, gone. They left. They were chased out by high taxes and Democrats going after them all the time legally, threatening to file lawsuits if their weapons were used in mass shootings or crimes. And they tried to do that in Maine, and thankfully it didn't pass. A lot of Democrats voted against it. So they made their point, and obviously In Maine, most of the state is rural and Republican. So some of these Republican districts have Democrats who are elected because they're called blue dog Democrats. They're Democrats that don't go along with the crazy left, supposedly. So anyway, they did carry over to any special session of the 131st legislature the other bill, LD 2283, which was the yellow flag law, amending it to make it more of a red flag law. So with that, they also had the so there was a red flag law that died. It's dead. It's not coming back this session anyway. So there were some successes, but there were too many losses. So we had 2 wins and 4 losses in this battle. And technically, yeah, it's easy to say, okay, well, you get a firearm, we'll just wait 72 hours. But the reason why it annoys people tremendously is if you own a firearm already, or several of them, what is a 72-hour waiting period to you, other than a hassle and an infringement on your Second Amendment right to get a firearm when you want to get one? They always have an argument like, well, you already have firearms, why do you need this one in 72 hours? Because I bought it. I'd like to go home with it. Because I already own firearms responsibly, and I'm not a problem. That's why. Okay, so conversely, if Maine had an extremely high suicide rate and just about everybody was using a firearm they've never owned one before, they'd go buy one and then commit suicide with it because that was like the only way to commit suicide, I would support a 72-hour waiting period. But that's just simply not the case. It's lies, it's propaganda, it's exaggeration, it's agenda. And that's why I don't support it. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. And I realize a lot of you live in other states where you wish you had the laws that they just passed and that's all you had to deal with. I understand that. You are heavily regulated in the states you are in, like Illinois and New York and other places. I really, truly sympathize. Californians, other states, Colorado. But this is Maine, and this is where the ground battle is on that. And Maine is a little bit different because we are more rural. Most people in Maine own a firearm. That's the other thing. A very high percentage. So that includes Democrats, independents, libertarians, Republicans, people non-affiliated. I got a cousin, she carries a firearm in her purse. She really doesn't use it often. She's not a gun nut. She just wants it for protection. That's the Second Amendment right there. So in fact, when that firearm has been in her purse for a long time, she actually needed us to clean it for her because she didn't know how to disassemble it to clean it. Okay, and you see a lot of gun owners like that in Maine. Okay, so basically you have a lot of people that want their firearms and they don't want to be messed with all these ridiculous regulations. And it is ridiculous. I'm not belittling suicide. I'm saying what's ridiculous is if you're going to take the rights from thousands of people, because firearms are very popular in Maine, we are a gun state, and then turn around and say, well, we're not infringing your rights to own a firearm, we're just regulating them. That doesn't go over well with people. And I saw a lot of Democrats on the internet who didn't even know they were passing this stuff. because they don't watch the local media anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in November. I think they went too far with this personally. And so anyway, that's my words on that. And I realize other people have more serious gun problems in their states. I don't mean to belittle anything, but I just wanted to make this message and shoot my own 2 cents into it. And anyway, stay safe, support the Second Amendment, and support fellow gun owners, and try to get more involved in politics. I made several phone calls to my local representative who lives around the corner from me. I walk by his house frequently. I talked with him a few times. I got his viewpoints on it. I just don't agree with how he voted and why he voted. Basically, he makes his Democrat, because he's a Democrat, he makes his Democrat voters happy by voting for these bills, and his mentality seems to be that if they pass, lawsuits will be filed, and the law will determine what's right and what's wrong. And he was good with that. So you got all kinds of different people in government too. He used to be a fire chief here in Lewiston. He's actually a nice guy. Is just, I don't agree with his thinking. So anyway, I guess that's about all. Have a beautiful day. Have a beautiful week. We're going to have range day tomorrow. Get stuff coming up on the channel. That should be fun. And I hope you have a beautiful spring that is finally here in Maine. And we will talk to you later. Stay safe out there and be good to one another. Ciao.